but just through my work for Lucasfilm, kind of got to return to Brian Daley's work and everything that he contributed, because it was really something special if you either read it or listened to it, experienced it in any way. It's phenomenal stuff. It's always great to revisit.
What were your guys' introductions to Brian Daley?
Brian was a very close friend of mine. We met when we were both working on our first novels in The Timely Death in '96, and we were not only good friends, but we were traveling mates in different parts of the world and collaborators on an anime series called Robotech, and then a series called Black Hole Travel Agency, which we wrote together. He was my closest buddy, so I knew him really well. We can talk about that.
Yeah, my first exposure to Brian Daley was likely the Star Wars radio plays. When I was a kid, my uncle had taped The Empire Strikes Back off of NPR, Washington, D.C., and I still have those tapes. I used to listen to those on long car rides, and later I was able to listen to the original Star Wars radio play, but those radio plays made such a difference in my life in terms of what you could do with just audio, and they are, in some ways, they're the best versions of this story, I think. And it led me to, be the writer who I am today. And one of my passion projects right now, I'm writing and directing the John Carter Mars the Audio series, which is kind of I would say inspired by Star Wars. And we have actors like Sean Patrick Flannery, John Carter, Tim Russ from Star Trek Voyager as Tar Starkis, and Ian McDermott, the Emperor, as the strange man in the tower. So it's been a real pleasure to see feel my own development from those moments when I was listening to Brian's work in the radio plays.
I saw the first Star Wars movie when I was about 7 years old. But when I was about 8 or 9, I think it was 9, my oldest brother handed me a copy of Han Solo at Star's End. And back then, there was no videotapes, there was no streaming, there was no cable. You could go to a rental store and rent the movie. What you saw on the screen, that's what stuck in your head. If you wanted more Star Wars, you needed to find another way to get those stories. In that moment, being this hooked on Star Wars even at 9 years old, Brian Daley delivered. So if you wanted more adventure rather than that galaxy far, far away, Brian Daley was a source for getting that kind of story. So as a kid, it was incredible because we always had, for me, I had an appetite for more storytelling set in that universe. Little did I know that, 20 plus years later, I get to work for Lucasfilm, and I think Mr. Cody was right next to me, and we got to work together quite often. And he was constantly bringing Brian Daley back into the mix in terms of, listen to this, isn't this great? Just really championing the work that Brian did on the radio dramas, but it didn't stop there. He also had a real passion for what Brian Daley did with those 3 books in 79 and 80, what he did in the radio dramas, what he did with Rebel Mission Orbital, and just it's one of those things where if you get to work with Michael, he really highlights those things that you need to pay attention to, and Brian Daley was always one of those constants. And so it was one of those things that I really appreciate. Thank you, Michael. It really illuminated just how special Brian was.
Yeah, my first exposure to Brian Daley was also Han Solo at Star's End. It was available at my library, and I got it, and I read it, and I read it, and then I had to give it back to the library. And then there was nothing else Star Wars to read, and like it took me years before I realized, there's 2 other books by him that I think I managed to find, like one of the Lando Calrissian books, and enjoyed that. But then it's like, oh wow, there's Han Solo's Revenge, there's Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, and just opened up bigger worlds. And that Han Solo and Star Wars, it just still sticks with me. Like the storyline, I still remember it, and vividly, just especially that ending with like the whole thing. I'm a spoiler alert. Star's End is a prison, and in order to escape, they actually launch it.
It is such a great story. Brian those books have none of the, what I call the trademark symbols of Star Wars. There's just one mention of the Empire. But the rest are in this corporate sector kind of area. But they captured the spirit of Star Wars like few other books do. You know, he really, if there was somebody to write Star Wars, this was the guy to do it. He just knew, it was in his bones, I think.
Yeah, it was. I think being close to the source, you know, getting to write those books right on the heels of the first film, and Brian, Brian and I went to see the premiere of Star Wars together. I just turned 30, just give it some perspective, but he came out of that film just wide-eyed, and in personality, he was kind of like Han Solo. He was very roguish and cynical. But I think in the film, the character that he related to was Luke, because he'd spent his life just sort of stargazing. He just used to. He and his family would sit outside their home in New Jersey and gaze at the stars and wait for meteor showers and things like that. And I think the notion of Luke on Tatooine just looking up and knowing that there was something more out there, that's what sort of really drew Brian into the franchise. And he was just a natural, as Michael said.
There was something Michael said that I wanted to comment on. I wish I could put you onto these conversations that we had way back in the day. Working for Lucasfilm, we often would have conversations just about what stories are Star Wars. You know, what is it about this part? What elements need to be in play for this to be a Star Wars story? There's a lot of things that are taken into consideration. But if you would take that into account, you look at how the fandom likes Star Wars stories, and you see people kind of arguing or debating whether it's space opera or space fantasy or all these different subgenres of what makes a story a Star Wars story. Michael and I had a lot of conversations about that. And at some point, and this was after our last conversation, because some conversations just don't go away, they keep playing in my head. But I just came to the conclusion, or at least the theory, that I don't really think there's any subgenre that really defines Star Wars. I kind of adopted, I think it's more of an aesthetic. You could be any kind of story. But if you've got stormtroopers, blasters, lightsabers, Jedi, Force, all these little elements help make a story a Star Wars story. The problem with that theory is Brian Daley. Because if you look at his books, especially those 3 books, there's no Empire, there's no Jedi, there's no Force. But there's no way you can read those stories without unquestionably saying this is Star Wars. That adventure, this swashbuckling feel about it, the corporate authority that kind of stands in for the Empire, the Western feel of everything, gunslingers, flying at the seat of your pants, just adventure after adventure after adventure with the character that, don't ever tell me the odds, going straight into that next crisis. It's Star Wars. And it's one of those things that when Michael would keep telling me, this is what we need, I get it. It doesn't fit within my theory, but it's unquestionably this is a Star Wars story. And it's incredible. It's just incredible he was able to do that on the front end of what came to EU.
One of the things you said yesterday to me is that he had no videotapes to reference. But he got those voices down like no one else. He knew Han Solo's voice in Star Wars. Like I had so many great lines in those books, and it's a Humphrey Bogart type of character too, right? So it's a classic trope,
Yes. And Brian spoke like that, actually. He really had an edge to him. I remember when he got the commission to write the first book, and he was just gung-ho and writing all about, stormtroopers and this, that, and the other thing, and then he got a note from Lucasfilm saying, no, you can't use any of that. That's all off limits to you. You can write about Han and Chewie, but don't go anywhere else. So Brian had to tear up, dozens of pages that he'd already written and start from scratch. But he just, he grew up on Marvel Comics, on Flash Gordon. He was just a natural fit. I think he had a lot of the same early influences that maybe George had. And so, it just really worked out for him.
Do you know a little more about the process of how he got to write the Han Solo books?
He was one of the first authors to be published under the Daley imprint. It was a spin-off from Valentine Books. He and Terry Brooks were two of the first authors. And when Daley got the license to do Star Wars, they just thought that Brian would be a good fit. He published his first novel called Doomfarers of Korriban, which I really recommend. It's an excellent fantasy novel. And they thought he'd be a great fit for Star Wars. And he had a list of characters that he could choose from. He could write about Han, or he could write about Leia, but he was attracted to Han immediately.
So one of the things when I did the biography of Brian that I found out, I interviewed his old editor, Owen Locke, and Brian wasn't the first person on the list. They had two other authors and they couldn't make the deadlines. These books, they were written in like 30 days, right? Yeah, I mean, when you write for work for hires like this, sometimes you had, when I was writing The Force Awakens, you're not, well, I had 2.5 weeks, you know. It's like so intense.
Right.
So I can see Brian just, you're writing your first draft, you know, that's what you have to do. You don't have a lot of time to polish. But he was able to do that, and he did it so well that when the radio play, the original writer of the radio play didn't work out, they went to Brian.
He was, he wrote on a royal typewriter, you know, just picking like this. And I would watch him sometimes, you know, I don't know how many of you have ever seen Eddie Helen, you know, play guitar, you know, but when you feel like somebody is really just wedded to an instrument or a piece of technology, that was Brian, and it was coming right from his brain, right out onto the paper. So the fact that he could do that in 30 days just didn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I remember Owen Locke, his editor, telling me, you know, Brian, he could have done so much more. And I was like, oh my gosh, these editors think you just pump out these books, and he pumped out all of Robotech, you know, the Core Monday books, Tapestry of Magic, Tron. He had a book every year, you know. I mean, it was amazing. And finally, Gamelot, which Jim finished. So
Yeah. He just he was a natural writer. He was, you know, and he enjoyed writing more than anything. I would drag him on his trips to different places, but he was much more at home behind that royal typewriter, just using his imagination. You know, whenever we go anywhere, I always think, like, this is exotic, but it's probably not as exotic as what he's thinking instead. So,
On that note, when you think about how the picture is made in terms of how quickly you could write on the typewriter, on top of that, read his writing, because the word count that he uses to put you in a character's head, to put you in a setting, to have you plugged into what he is setting up, it's truly amazing. The vocabulary there is absolutely delicious. And you know the character right off the bat. You know exactly whether it's a lone shark or a gunslinger or Han Solo or someone else. You're in that character's head immediately, and you know what's in front of them. You know what they're walking into or about to confront or what the situation is. And just his ability to do that in the word count that he did, with the word choice that he did, with the flow of the sentences that he has, that by itself is amazing. When you think about how quickly he's doing this and the way he's doing this, it's brilliant. So, you know, it's really a treasure. If you get a chance to go back and review his books or his radio dramas, it's incredible stuff.
I was privileged to be in on some of the recording sessions of the radio dramas, which Brian scripted, and in the recording sessions, sometimes lines of dialogue didn't work, so he'd be off in the corner writing what were considered wild lines. He would just constantly be able to come up with alternatives for dialogue. I mean, faster than anybody I'd ever seen. And I just want to pull this book up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. It's the Star Wars radio dramas, and it's as much about Brian as it is about the making of the dramas, and it's a terrific read. It'll be up here if any of you want to take a look at it or take a photo of it.
Yeah, talking about his writing, look at Doom Fairs, I always did Cormund, but Cormund, is that how you pronounce it? Cormund, okay. That's his first novel, and he fought in Vietnam, so he came back from Vietnam. He was an older student when he went to college, finished up college, and you read his first novel, and it's like an English major meets a Vietnam vet, meets a fan, somebody who wants to write fantasy. It's just a weird blend. It's a wonderful blend of that. And every chapter, he has a little epigraph of a quote from a poem. Spencer, Fairy Queen, all that stuff. He was a very, very literate writer. And I remember a scene in the book. I brought the book with me, actually. I forgot to bring it on this panel, but there's this great scene where the Vietnam vet, the Vietnam soldier, he goes to a fantasy land and he wants to go back home. He finally gets back home to, I think it's New Jersey in the book, right? And then the best part of the book is in the middle, and he's in New Jersey trying to deal with his life, and he can't deal with it, and he wants to go back to this other world where he's been.
That's right.
Yeah, and so there's a great line where he knocks his Ford, I think he had a Ford pickup, knocks it on the side, and wishes it good well, and he knows he's going to go back to this fantasy world. And it's just a great book.
Yeah, going back to the Han Solo books, do you guys have a favorite character or scene or any bit that you think is really cool in fiction? Do you know how he edited? Like, was he editing on the fly, or did he write and then go back? Or
Like Michael said, he was writing so fast that the first draft was the one that was submitted, and he worked with an editor at Daley, but they came out pretty fully formed. I remember just being sort of the person he would sometimes call and say, "Do you think that this might work, or do you think that this sounds okay?" And I mean, he just had it. He just was able to just write those books. Almost fully formed. I think that the story was in his mind, and he just got it down on paper.
that is an amazing ability.
Oh yeah, it was remarkable. Yeah, he was really widely read, you say, and he was always I've never met anybody who just was constantly cutting things out of, at the time, newspapers and magazines and files for technology or for things that he thought he might be able to use in his novels. So he's always relying on that. And a real mentor to writers who were trying to break in. Anytime he met anybody, the next day he was sending him some article or sending him something. So very mentoring personality in addition to everything else.
Can we play a little bit of his voice?
Oh yeah, for it. That's cool thing.
So you can find this on Ryan Daley's official website, and it's a recording from the Mark Steiner show on it was on NPR in the 90s. Yeah, and he's talking about AI and what's going to happen in science fiction in AI. I think it's very relevant for today. So if I can get it to you.
Because they're under the impression, even though predictably they may be, according to what we think in 1995, more likely to be accurate. But then, of course, nobody else where robots evolve into self-programming and self-improving machines, and at least in the most benign scenario, they kind of take human beings on as pets. And you can find that in science fiction, but as John said, it doesn't satisfy what a lot of readers are looking for in terms of a human tale. Yeah. So science fiction goes in so many different directions. I would call to question a little bit your remark about the predictive power of science fiction. What really happens is so many people make so many stats and so many things that some of us fix to the wall. Yeah, exactly. So you can find those more Rebeccan tales if you would. Hard enough to say.
There's two places where science fiction may be more successful than can be done. They are. One is time travel.
Yeah, you can listen to a little bit of his voice to kind of bring into
It
this.
does sound like Han Solo. That was the first thing I thought. I was like, that's Han Solo.
Yeah. I know he's. I was able when I was able to interview Jim and his Brian Daley's widow Lucia, And I was able to go to his office, and wish had kept his office kind of the way it was. And I saw his file cabinets with all these manila folders with all these different magazines from the 90s and the 80s that he had collected. And the typewriter was still there. And he had on his desk I think a triangle that said, he was trying to write the Return of the Jedi radio dramas before he passed away. And it was a different type of project because they didn't have quite the budget that they had for the original. So you could either do time, I think it's like speed, quality, or quantity. You can only pick two, and that's really the way it is.
Right. Well, going back to that, I realized, like, there were two questions out. What about favorite parts of the Han Solo books?
I sometimes focus on little things, but it's little things that I find incredible. I think Star Wars Revenge, he introduces Clover to Q1. And if you read just those 4 paragraphs when that character is introduced, I mean, it's a lot of information, very succinctly, puts you right at the moment, who the smoke truck is, who his henchmen are, what he's all about, all the capabilities. But that name sticks out. For whatever reason, I could just never forget that name. Who comes up with Clover 241? But it's an awesome name, and it's a great Star Wars name. I mean,
that just describes it right there.
It just stuck with me. I was like, who thinks of that? But it's fantastic. When he introduces Galandro, and you've got this menacing gunslinger, the way he describes him, the way he's got that mustachio, beaded, deal with short hair, and then he really conveys just how much of a terror this guy is, how he's just a killer. Those cool blue eyes, and this is, I think, through the point of view of Han Solo, seeing this person, he's assessing him right off the bat, and is getting that read on how he looks, and just how those eyes are described, that this isn't someone you mess with. And it really puts you in that moment that this is going to be an issue. Dealing with this gunslinger is going to be an issue. And it's just amazing, because it's not a whole lot of word count there. But you see it, you feel it, and this is before, I think this is before Boba Fett, but I'm reading this on that, oh, damn, this is Boba Fett. It's like before Boba Fett was even introduced to anybody. And it's just but it's moments like that. It's like, this is just amazing work. And if you go through those books and everything else, you see how many things that Brian was able to tap into that you're going to see this later on, whether it's in the films or anything else. He really had his finger on the pulse of what Star Wars is.
He was a fan of westerns, and he was a tall guy, and he could mimic the John Wayne walk. He used to always do that. And I really recommend, if you ever want to search for some things that he did, he wrote scripts for a TV series called Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, and it was a western in outer space. And the stories he contributed to that are terrific, and they're in the vein of what you're talking about, his ability to just create a terrific character very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think you said it really well. Pluto too, for one. Galandro, those are good. So Zim, I mean, within a 170-page novel, he creates a whole backstory for Star Wars. That is beyond the Jedi, and I used a lot of that, and I did a kind of riff on that when I did something called The Despotic, which was for Lucasfilm, where I kind of developed that era of Star Wars, and it was so much fun to do, and I owe all that to Brian, and what he started in Han Solo and Lost Legacy, and the warbots of Zim, and all that stuff.
I remember when he was working on that, because he found an article about those ceramic soldiers that were around in China. Yeah, and that was his jumping off point. Wow, for the robot soldiers. So he just said, I found something. And it was a little bit of Flash Gordon and a little bit of real life.
That's really cool. Because that was a new discovery at the time. So it was like,
right.
Just
exploring together and incorporated that
giant arm.
He was always looking for things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's dive back over to the radio dramas, and for those who haven't listened to it, it's not just like the movie itself, but that it is hugely expanded. That NPR, how long are they? 12 hours each?
Yeah, 6.5, and then 5 hours for Empire, and then 3 for Return of the Jedi.
But I think somebody made a comment that, it was like 20 times the amount of dialogue that was in
Absolutely.
the film, He just had to expand on all those different aspects of the film.
Yeah, he came out here to LA and we had to write an episode every couple of days. He had to hound away. He was in a hotel here in Los Angeles because they needed it done. From what I learned is that there was a first writer, we got a British writer on Star Wars that they had hired, and he wrote a version of his own version of Star Wars. It was like the Lord of the Rings. And I don't know where that script is. It sounds like a fantastic but they said, nah, this isn't what we're looking for. We kind of want something more in tune with the movies. So then they said they were desperate for a writer, and Brian had been doing the Han Solo books, and they had a good relationship with him. They went to him, and that's how we got, from what I heard, that's how I got the job.
Yeah, one of the cool things about this NPR film is that they introduced like so many new characters that are just like little throwaway line ones of like, oh, we have Captain Colton and such, and then those have come back around and woven their way back into the larger Star Wars storytelling.
It's not easy writing for audio either, because you have to describe through dialogue without being expository too much. You have to be a little bit, but Brian does it so well. It's so natural in a lot of his dialogue, especially Empire. I think Empire is where he's in his peak. I think that's the best of the bunch. But yeah.
The actors were having a great time too. It's just a throwback to like the early days of radio, like The Shadow and all those other series, and just really being able to bring these characters to life through audio. It's terrific.
Yeah, there's a great episode just between Han and Luke in Empire Strikes Back, and it's their conversation in that little tent in the winter on Hoth while the blizzard is hitting. And it's just the two of them, and that's what radio does so well. It takes the epic and makes it intimate. It does that. You can't do that in a movie.
Now, what do they talk about? I mean, Luke is...
You talk about Leia a little bit.
What else did we talk about?
You gotta keep Luke alive somehow. Now I'm thinking...
Maybe it's Brian and Jim on one of your trips in a tent, right?
I won't say who we were talking about.
So where did you go on some of these trips?
We went all over the place. We went to Nepal and Peru and Guatemala, Mexico. I just sort of dragged him along. But he felt like he needed to get away from the typewriter. And so we'd be in the middle of some horrible situation and he'd be cursing me out for dragging me along. But I think he enjoyed it. Probably found his way into his fiction.
Yeah, I think I read something in what you wrote, or where there was a videotape of Return of the Jedi in some jungle camp or something.
No, that was we were trekking. We came back from a trek in Nepal. We've been out for like 30 days, and Brian wanted to reward the Sherpas who had helped us, carry our gear and get stuck in the rain and everything else. And there was a video store in Kathmandu. And they had a bootleg of Return of the Jedi, that had been shot in film, and it was all grainy and horribly shot. So he rented it, brought it back to our hotel, invited all the Sherpas there, and everybody sat around and just had a wild time watching the movie.
Again, picturing that must have been just a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, yes. Brian got severely loaded. Part of it was he was celebrating the fact that he had gotten a telegram that Return of the Jedi was a go. And so he was finally going to be able to do that. But then when we got back to the States, that project collapsed. And it wasn't until shortly before he died that he was able to complete that trilogy.
Wait, you said telegram?
That's
awesome.
Telegram. Yes,
that's awesome. It's
1983.
It's funny the way you're describing his situations. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
I have.
It's like you're Del Griffith and he's Neil, and you're just dragging him through.
That works. Yeah.
One of his other Star Wars projects that probably doesn't get a whole lot of mention is his original audio drama, the Rebel Mission to Ordnance Hell. You guys have any thoughts and recollections of those?
It's if you get a chance to, if you don't have a record player with the original record or a cassette, you can probably find it on YouTube. It's not very long. It's sort of just out there in social media. It's not very long. It's about 20 to 30 minutes maybe in its playtime. But and I realize there's voice actors there. Listen to the dialogue because he captures Han Solo perfectly. He captures Luke Skywalker perfectly. But when you think about he's telling the story within 20 plus minutes, it's adventure after adventure after adventure, back to back to back, and it's just you're just flying by the seat of your pants from the get-go. Everything makes sense. Everything is got this incredible feel to it, and if you're looking for just a 20 to 30 minute bite of Star Wars that gives you that story for the day, listen to it because it's truly amazing what he's able to do with those voices in that setting and just how quickly he can connect all these adventures together that really give a good feel of Star Wars. But no, it's a really great story. I'm truly impressed that he can do that quickly.
Yeah, and that is the original source for the bounty hunter or mental line in Empire Strikes Back. He was asked to go fill that in. So it was like his first part of I would say his first part of EU, but he's already written EU stuff. But yeah, but one that's specifically tied to a particular moment in the films.
One of the downsides of being friends with him was he came back from Lucasfilm when they were filming Empire Strikes Back, and he said, "Jim, I've got to tell you something. I got to tell you something about the movie." I said, "Brian, wait, I don't want to hear anything about the movie. I've got to tell you something about the movie. I got to tell you something." I was practically putting my hands over my ears, and he said, "Darth Vader is Luke's father."
He didn't!
I was like Luke at the end, just going, "Woo!" So I didn't have that. I was spoiled for that film.
Wow!
This is, by the way, this was Brian's shirt when the film had a different title. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about this now, and Brian was one of the writers, and I think you were too, in contention for continuing the expanded universe during the time of publication. And one of the things that I would have always liked to see, and I believe I saw when I worked at Lucasfilm during the Phantom Menace, I believe I saw a treatment or a document that was one of the pitch materials that was sent in, because Del Rey and Bantam, they were two different publishing entities at that time, and there was a bidding war, I think, for the Star Wars rights. And I think Brian and maybe you too, you were on the other end, right?
Yeah, that's when the license was sort of up for grabs, and Del Rey made a last pitch to Lucasfilm and asked Brian to just outline where he thought the series should go after the third film. And it was, it's interesting because it's like an alternate reality. Like, I really like Tim Zahn's approach, but Brian's was not the military science fiction that we got from Tim and the Bantam line, but something more Arthurian, much more mythical. I'm always imagining where Brian might have taken the line.
Yeah, something like Luke trying to assemble his knights.
Yeah, assemble his knights.
Like the arc that we build Knights of the Round Table.
Right.
Well, Jim, you did work with him on a lot of things, so you did have a really good insight to how his brain worked. Can you tell us about working on Robotech with him?
I don't know how many of you are familiar with Robotech. It was sort of American anime. It's a crazy idea. It's sort of like, I think Woody Allen, one of his first films, he took this Japanese film and he rewrote all the dialogue to have it be like the search for some chicken noodle soup recipe or something. It was just a crazy film. And with Robotech, an author named Carl Masek took 3 unrelated Japanese anime and felt that the animation styles allowed them to be wedded together into one story, and it just wrote all new dialogue. And it caught on in the early 80s, and Brian and I adapted it. It was a 22-book series in the end. And you talk about fast writing, so we had to deliver a book a month. Just one, and Brian was up to the task. I mean, never late on handing in a manuscript.
So how did that collaboration work?
We divided. Brian would be writing on one book, and I'd be writing the sequel. And then when he finished his manuscript, I'd read his manuscript. He'd read mine. We were trying to find a joint voice under our pseudonym Jack McKinney, and it worked out well. And it was Jack McKinney. It was a long time before anybody realized that Brian Daley had a hand in that.
And well, cranking out one a month.
One a month, yeah. But I mean, really, we used to wear out VCRs because we had the VCR tapes of the animation. So we just, be watching it, try and describe what was going on screen, and that amount of pausing on the videotape, I don't know, none of you probably remember. If you paused for too long, the tape was shot. So we went through tape after tape after tape trying to get that down.
Do you miss those days of writing that fast?
No. Although, I'll tell you, some of the Star Wars books that I wrote had pretty quick turnaround. And it's a little frustrating as a writer because you just have to let go of a manuscript sooner than you might want to. And you just have to be satisfied with, sometimes as you say, like a first draft, and just get it out there and hope that you've done enough. But that's part of franchise work.
Yeah, it's crazy, and the perfectionist me hates that. The fact that I have to turn in a manuscript before even getting to spell check it, at times, which is crazy to think about, but that's the business. You have to be. I guess you have to be good enough to be able to get to that point to do that. So Brian was definitely able to do that.
Do you guys have any thoughts on just like lasting legacy in Star Wars or in general as a writer and as a friend?
I think he's regarded as one of the chief contributors, don't you think, in the franchise? I mean, I think his books are really well respected, well regarded. I mean, he helped create the vocabulary for Star Wars. I mean, like the Z95 Headhunter became like the forerunner of the X-Wing, and he was the first one to introduce swoops, the swoop bikes. I think he was also the first one to put the Falcon up on end, going through a canyon, and losing part of itself, even before that made it into the movie. So he was really plugged in.
One of my college projects, I had to do a script, and I did an audio script of censored edition.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then, I mean, even, was it Ann Crispin who wrote the...
A.C. Crispin,
yeah, A.C. Crispin, who wrote the Han Solo trilogy, and she paid homage to Brian. And I think even in the Solo film, there were some callbacks to Brian's work. So, he's sort of one of the founding fathers.
Yeah, one of the things in Dragon Boss's ship is like specifically the skull that you see on the cover of like the Lost Legacy novel. So it's his DNA is still there and coming back out. I don't know. You guys have any extra thoughts?
Well, when I talked to L. Neil Smith, and he said when he was writing Lando books, he had long conversations with Brian on, first of all, how to make this connect with his series, and how do you get this done. I think L. Neil Smith had even less time than Brian Daley for his books. He had like 20 days, 15 days. So, how do you do this? I think Brian helped him through that.
He did. That was Brian Mentor. I remember those conversations with he was having with Daniel Smith, who was not a fast writer and really had to up his game in order to get those books out.
I always saw that what he did was it's foundation to the what will become the Star Wars expanded universe, and as everyone's pointed out, what we see in the films. There's little things that you see throughout his work that you kind of see repeat in one way or another. There's in one of his books, it's Bullocks, the labor droid is now like layered match with this is a word choice. So something like combat automata, something really clever for this menacing droid he has to fight. But it's a gladiator fight. It's a real fight. And when you go through lots of different Star Wars material, if you go through a lot of Western material, you'll see gladiator arenas. You've got Attack of the Clones with Geonosis. You've got all these different things that you can see throughout the whole spectrum of Star Wars storytelling. If you go back to Brand's original work, you often find there was that idea, and now we see it, cross-pollinate all these other different kinds of games.
The name Bollocks, right?
Bollocks.
Yeah, in the British edition, it's called
Bollocks.
Bollocks.
We mean something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But no, I always remember Bollocks because he had the blue max droid inside his chest, and so that was just such a novel idea to have like this droid within a droid, and they have completely separate functions and personalities, and they get split apart at different times. And Han takes blue max within one place, and Bollocks has to go fight the gladiator arena. We'll open up to any other questions, comments? Here, right?
Yes. So we have a comment, but also,
Also, actually, can you stand up and
oh, sure.
we got a microphone for you. We want to record this.